All right, so we have Joey Rivers on with us. Joey, you want to give us a little background of who you are?
Yeah, Jacob, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. This is a first for me. I've never been on a podcast, so it's a really cool experience and been looking forward to it. So having said that, yes, my name is Joey Rivers. I'm from South Texas and the director of SOS Adventures. Uh, basically, uh, pre-COVID, we were teaching survival skills, basic survival skills for children, adults, families, scouting groups, basically anybody that wanted to learn with our Parks and Wildlife Department. And so there's a local park out here that we're holding classes, and so that's kind of was the crux of SOS Adventures. Uh, Along with that, I consider SOS Adventures what I do personally, which is I love to travel, love to experience new places and new things and meet new people. So I love, I guess, probably the last 3 or 4 years, been visiting as many of the national parks as I've been able to. Been doing some camping, trout fishing. I love trout fishing, and so that's kind of so it's uh, kind of two prong there. We do the survival stuff, and then it's also my personal website, sosadventures.com. And that's where you can find pictures and blog stories and that sort of thing of different trips and adventures that I've done. So,
Sure, sure. That's pretty cool. So, how did you get into the survival end of things? Like, what initially stirred your interest in getting involved with that?
yeah, sure. Well, if I really had to be honest, it would probably be when I was 8 years old, and my dad gave me my first buck knife. Uh, it was an old one that he had, and he gave it to me. And funny thing is, I promptly uh, cut my thumb pretty good. Took about 5 or 6 stitches. My mom took the knife away. She had no idea that my dad had given it to me, but probably typical for young boys at that age. We're out building forts and whittling and making bows and arrows and that kind of thing. So that's probably where it started. Fast forwarding to myself as an adult, I guess it was about '04. Was with the church, and we were looking for new ideas uh, for a summer camp. And so we were kind of brainstorming, what can we do to keep it interesting and something different that the kids hadn't ever seen. And uh, I said, hey, well, why don't we do something along the lines of survival? Uh, the movie had just come out, and the name of the movie escapes me, but it had Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro in it. Maybe you remember it. And they were supposed to be survival experts, and I had just seen that, and so I kind of threw the idea out there. It's like, hey, why don't we do a survival camp? And of course, none of us knew anything or had any clue about survival. Fortunately, we were able to find a gentleman who had just gotten out of the Marines. He was actually in the I don't want to say this incorrectly. He was a force Marine or Marine Recon. That's what it was. Marine Recon. So he had tons of experience with survival. So he came on board and basically ran the camp, and I shadowed him and learned. I mean, just a ton of stuff. So that's really where my interest was piqued. I wanted to learn more about it. So hung out with him. We did probably a total of 5 or 6 camps. Did a couple of trips to New Mexico where we, did a lot of the survival stuff. And then once we kind of parted ways, he had some other responsibilities that he needed to tend to, and so I kind of kept doing it. And then with the advent of YouTube and that sort of thing, it just kind of ate up all the survival videos I could find, and bought books and just really did a lot of self study and hands on stuff here at my house. So that's probably how I got involved in it.
Well, I guess to let everybody know how you and I met is on Go Wild, and that's kind of a new. You can use that as a tool almost to keep learning more. There's so many different trails that you can go on and learn new things like foraging and bushcraft and all that, and that's got to be a pretty good outlet for you to be able to kind of show the things you know and maybe even pick up on a few new things that you didn't know before.
Yes, that's true. And the community for it, those who don't know about it, Go Wild is just such an awesome social app. I've done the Facebook and the Instagram and the Twitter and all that kind of stuff, and it's just everything pales in comparison to Go Wild. The community there is obviously we're all like-minded, have a lot of the same interests, but it just, I don't know, there's a different vibe there. It's more of a, some people have used the word family. I haven't gotten there yet because most people I haven't even met, but I'll say we're a tight-knit community, and there's just so many resources there, so many people that have been doing any number of outdoor things for years, and so there's a great well of resources there to learn a lot of stuff. So I'm just really enjoying myself on Go Wild. It's actually the only app I use now.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed using it. I've personally been on it since I think it was January of this year. And then recently I started a business account for our business on there. So no, I've really been enjoying it, and there's always new things to learn. And everybody, all the listeners know that I always like to immerse myself in the outdoors and learning new things. And it's a pretty cool deal. Now you're the SOS Adventures. That's kind of it's there's there maybe is more out there than I know of, but I don't know of a lot of organizations teaching like kids or even adults survival, and it's kind of an important thing that maybe some of us overlook a little bit and don't know as much as we probably should or could. With, if you're going to be in the outdoors, you can get into some pretty sticky situations sometimes, and there's some skills in there that would be really good to know.
Yes, I totally agree. I just read a book not too long ago. I believe it was called When They Find My Body, and it was about an elderly lady. Well, I say elderly; she was like in her, I guess, 70s, late 60s, early 70s. She was hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I'm not sure if you're familiar or your listeners familiar with that story, but innocently enough, she had been hiking with a friend of hers, had gone some hundreds of miles with no issues. Her friend had to end up leaving the trail due to other responsibilities. So this lady continued on her own. And one morning she got up, she went to go use the restroom off the trail. And according to the book, I guess she was, didn't want to be spotted by any other hikers. So she might have gone a little farther off the trail than she should have, ended up getting turned around and got lost. And ultimately she ended up perishing. And they didn't find her body for like a couple of years later. And so something as innocent as, I'm going to get off the trail just to go use the restroom, and she ended up losing her life. And of course, you've got a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks saying, "Well, she should have done that, or this, she should have done that." And first of all, I would never do that. But I guess something that everybody can agree on is that she probably didn't have enough basic wildland skills to perhaps maybe survive a little bit longer. And I think nowadays, a lot of people, I've read some books on survival experiences and stories, and the prevailing uh, mindset, I think, is that people have this idea that nothing will ever happen to them. They're out there enjoying themselves, whatever it may be. And a lot of people I'm just going for a day hike. And there have been people that have lost their lives on a simple day hike. And so, yes, I totally agree that basic survival skills are a must for anybody that spends times outdoors.
It's kind of funny today. I was driving and listening to podcasts, and the one that I was listening to when I got back into town, it was the Gritty podcast with Brian Call. And it's kind of strange that an episode like what I was listening to popped up right before you and I were going to sit down for an interview. But it was Brian Call and Aaron Snyder that were talking about mistakes they've made over the years hunting.
Oh, wow.
And they were getting into talking about not dropping their packs when they're going on a stalk, and like necessities that they carry in their binocular harness. And I never thought about that before. Like Brian was saying that he carries like an emergency blanket and some granola bars and like basically enough stuff to get him through the night if he ends up in a situation where he can't get back to camp or whatever. And I never really thought about that before. And it's just kind of funny that it was way back in the archives. They have over 600 episodes, and I
Oh
just
my
like
goodness.
scrolled super fast and clicked one, and that's what it ended up being. And it's kind of funny that it worked out that way, that I was listening to that on the way home to go do an interview about survival. So I
Wow.
guess,
Yeah.
would you be interested in going into, maybe let's talk a little bit about a few of like the just some basic essentials that you would take with you on a hike or on an excursion in the backcountry.
Oh, sure. Of course, I'm sure most everybody's heard of Dave Canterbury. Uh, if you haven't, they've probably been living under a rock. But if involved with anything survival related or backcountry related, you know Dave Canterbury, and he was on TV. I think it was I can't remember the name of the survival show he was on, but he was on there with Cody Lundeen and a couple other people. But he's really made I don't want to say a dent. He's just really this icon in the survival community, and his wealth of knowledge, and he holds classes. I believe they're in Ohio, and he has I guess coined this phrase, the 10 C's. And so basically, they're items that you should have with you anytime you're away from civilization or in the backcountry. At all times you're in the backcountry, or you're heading out, away from, I guess, quote unquote, civilization. But those 10 things are a cutting tool, which is obviously a knife, some form of combustion or a way to create fire, whether it be a lighter, a ferro rod, flint and steel, just something where you can start a fire. Cover, which would be a tarp, a rain poncho, something that you can get out under from rain or the sun, whatever have you, some type of cover. Cordage is another one, which is a lot of people use paracord, some type of twine, something that you can use to construct shelters, and then any other number of things you can do with cordage. A container, obviously something that's metal, so you could boil water if you had to purify water. Candle is basically another term used for some type of a light, a flashlight, headlamp, something of that nature, in case you get stuck out after dark. You have a means to illuminate, what you're doing or working on or where you're going. Cotton, I use a schmog. That's, I guess, fairly common. It's a large piece of cotton. It's probably, I think it's like 42 by 42, so it's huge. And you can use bandanas, uh, anything as long as it's cotton. And the need for cotton is so if you had to, you could create char cloth. And char cloth is just a means to start a fire without match. You can use your ferro rod or flint and steel to get a fire going with that. Compass, obviously, you don't want to get lost, and you'd be surprised how many people go in the backcountry without a compass, but it's very important. Cargo tape, duct tape. I think there's that saying, uh, you know, everything that needs fixing can be done with either cargo tape uh, or WD-40. So those two things. But
Right.
you want to, so yeah. So what is it? If it moves, use duct tape. If it doesn't move, use WD-40. I think is the saying. But so some type of duct tape, and then finally a canvas needle, which is something you can use to make repairs. I've tried little regular sewing needles, and they work fine. You can make an improvised compass. I've not tried it with a canvas needle. And canvas needles are usually fairly large needles, but that's just another tool that you can use to repair items and that sort of thing, pick out splinters. But with those 10 things I'll always have with me on my person whenever I'm in the backcountry. So I would highly recommend that people look up the 10 C's and, you know, obviously suit it to their needs, to possibly where they're going. But those are ultimately the things that I just won't go outdoors without.
So, tell me a little bit, like, are you a big time guy into like being super lightweight, or does it depend on like where you're going and how long you're going, or is there some extras that you throw in when you're going out?
Yeah, I think I've kind of run the gamut of backpacking as far as, first I got the basic gear, and then you find out, oh, this works this much better and it weighs so much less. So, I kind of moved into that. And then it was like, because I'm getting older, my knees are getting a little a little more troublesome. So obviously, the less weight you carry, the easier it is to move. So we went through the lightweight stage and kind of hit the ultralight a little bit, but I don't know. To me, and not knocking anybody else, but to me, I would rather carry the extra weight and have something that's durable. I know is going to last, uh, versus, and it's less expensive versus paying the extra money and paying for something that to me just in my hand feels just like you could break it, just crush it. So, uh, but I guess I'm somewhere in the middle now. And within the last few years, for me, I think moving into bushcraft was kind of the next step. I'd done several years with the survival thing, and I thought, well, I think the the mantra is if you can survive 72 hours, in a situation where you're lost or injured, then you'll be more times than not you'll be rescued. And I got to think, well, what happens if you're out there for a week or 2 weeks or a month? And then I think on the History Channel or Nat Geo, one of those channels, that show alone started coming out, and these people are out there for 70, 80 days. And it's just wow. So bushcraft to me was the next step, I guess, in my progression of learning outdoor skills. And it's been a real surprise that a lot of the bushcraft stuff equipment is really heavy. You've got stainless steel pots and the beefier knives and the thicker packs, and so it's a lot heavier. But so I think at this point I've found a good middle of the road to where it's not super heavy, but it's not super light. But I have confidence and I can depend on my equipment.
Sure, sure. So, you wanna tell me a couple stories of some of the places you've been and the things that you've seen through this journey?
Oh wow. Let me see. My first trip to the mountains was, I guess, New Mexico. And I was actually volunteering for Civil Air Patrol. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with that, but basically they did search and rescue by plane, and got involved with that. And actually, the reason I got involved with that is teaching kids the outdoor skills. But we ended up doing a couple of missions in New Mexico. There was a lost pilot that had gone down, and so we started doing that. We flew from here to I want to say it was Alamogordo, or just maybe just this side of the Texas border, and ended up making it in the Alamogordo area. So that was my first taste of mountains, and I just fell in love. So we started going over there, and that's been a mainstay for the last 10 or 15 years. Well, for the last 5 years, I guess, I've been to Colorado, Arizona, California, Oregon, Utah, Nevada. So kind of hit that whole, southwest, western, northwestern portion of the United States. And it's just some of the things, I don't know. It's, you see a picture or you see something online and you're like, wow, that's really beautiful. But until you're there and you're just standing in the middle of it, it pales in comparison. So I've seen some really beautiful country in Northern California and Oregon. Uh, it's just so rugged. I think it kind of really drove home the point of you need to be prepared with basic survival skills, because I mean, you just look out across these vast, vast forests and you think, man, you know, how easy would it be for a person to get lost out there? So, but, but yeah, that's kind of, and I actually at the end of the month, myself and a few guys from work were headed to Colorado to go do a little trout fishing and camping and hiking. So, been looking forward to that. But, uh, but yeah, I love the mountains.
Yeah, that no, and like you were saying, it's in a picture. It's hard to do. It's hard to do justice of the mountains in a picture. They look nice in a picture, but it's not the same as when you're actually out there in them. So,
Right.
so when you talk about going trout fishing, are you fly fishing or
Right.
what kind of fishing are
Well,
you doing?
yeah, I think it was 2 years ago I purchased my first fly setup, and I got it at Sportsman's Warehouse on sale as a combo kit, and it was kind of, I say it was decent. Of course, what do I know? We took it last year, a buddy of mine and myself, and we fished for a day and a half, I guess, maybe 2 days fly fishing. and nothing. I think I had one blow up on a fly and that was it. So I think it was the third morning we were there, pulled out the fly stuff again and went down to the lake and given it a shot. And I just got frustrated. I said, that's it. Unfortunately, I brought my spinning gear with me, and first cast on spinning tackle, I caught a trout. Of course, they were stalker trout, but it's still a blast. And we ended up getting a limit, and we ate, had fresh trout for dinner. But yes, I would definitely want to become a better fly fisherman. Problem I'm having right now is I really don't have I guess a mentor, if for lack
Sure.
of a better word. And so I've kind of put it on pause because I don't want to learn on my own and then, you know, do things wrong or make mistakes, and then it becomes habit and it'll be harder to break later on. So that's why I'm kind of trying to find a fly fishing mentor right now. But I've been fishing since I was a kid. Fly casting. I'm sorry, spin cast or spinning reels, bait cast, that sort of thing, bass, catfish, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I really love trout fishing.
Yeah, no, that just sparked my curiosity. I'm no mentor by any means on fly fishing. I've done a little bit of it when I was a kid. I went to an outdoor skills camp every
Uh-huh.
year for numerous years in a row, and they taught us about fly fishing there. And my uncle had an old fly
Uh,
fishing rod and reel that he gave me, and a vise for tying flies, and I got into doing that for a little bit. I haven't tied flies in years. A
wow.
couple of years ago, I've never done any like mountain stream fishing or anything. It's been lakes. A lot of times, like
Uh-huh.
bluegill, crappies. I've caught quite a few bluegills and crappies, but it's a lot different situation when you're on flowing water, and so
Yes.
I'm not the person to tell you what how to do it or what on there, but I've always thought it would be fun to go up into the mountains
Yeah.
and fish for trout
Yes.
on a mountain stream. The only trout I've ever caught have been through the ice. That's maybe a little bit
Oh
something that
wow.
you I don't know if you've ever gone ice fishing before, but in the neck of the woods that I live in, it's kind of a big thing.
No, that's another thing on my bucket list is ice fishing. I, and that's part of the, well, I don't say problem, but that's the thing. I see all these awesome pictures on Go Wild, and these people are catching fish on fly rods and they're ice fishing, and I'm like, man, I want to do that, but there's down here in South Texas is just locations to do that. They're just non-existent, so I have to travel, so I don't get to do it as often. But we were in Colorado a few years ago and happened to, I think we were coming into Estes, and I saw these two trucks, and I could see that they were parked, but the surface they were parked on just looked weird to me. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't a parking lot or a road or a field. It just looked weird to me. So as we got closer, I realized they were parked on the lake. They were ice fishing, and it just totally blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I definitely want to try that one day.
Yeah, no, I'd have to say that ice fishing is probably my favorite kind of fishing to do. I don't know what it is about it, but I don't know if it's because of your slip bobber fishing. Slip bobber fishing to me is a lot of fun, but like
Uh-huh.
when I go out, I this might sound like cheating, but I almost after having some electronics, I can't stand going ice fishing if I don't have my flasher because
Oh.
it just drives me nuts sitting over that hole. It's not like you're out trolling in a boat or something. Like when I'm fishing out of a boat, I like to troll because you're always moving and finding where the fish are. But
Right.
ice fishing, you're picking a spot and I don't know. I really like. I think I like the fact of slip bobber fishing and the flasher. Like with a flasher, you can see your hook on there too. I don't know if you've ever
Oh
used a
wow.
flasher before. So it's just lights
No.
in a ring. Then when you pick your line up, you can see the bait or hook or whatever. You can adjust your sensitivity so a fish will show up on there anywhere from green to yellow to orange to red, and red is bigger.
Oh,
And
okay.
if it's a bigger blip of light, that means it's a bigger fish. So when
Huh.
you the maybe that's why I like ice fishing so much. But so if you have a fish underneath you and you're marking that line, when you pick your bait up, the fish you can see them react to it.
Oh wow.
So like if they're not really paying
Huh.
attention to it, you can kind of change up what you're doing to see if you can get them to react. And all fish are different. You can tell
Uh-huh.
if it's a northern pike or a perch or a walleye or a crappie or whatever, once you mark a few and see kind of how
Uh-huh.
they react, you kind of get to where you kind of have an idea what it is that you're marking. But that's a lot of
That's
fun being able
amazing.
to see the mark on the depth finder and see how the fish are reacting. Sometimes they won't
That's
chase it at all,
incredible.
and then you just know that they're not hungry.
Well, yeah, and that's, I the species, even the species of fish are different up north. I spoke of muskie and pike and all those kinds of fish. I've never even seen one in real life. I've seen them on TV shows, and I thought, man, I would definitely want to catch one of those. So that's another reason to head up there and do some fishing.
So do you have I guess when we talked the other day, you had talked about the Dakotas being on your bucket list. Do you have any plans in the future set up to head up north?
Yes, possibly this summer. I don't know. Um, Set to retire in a couple of years, so for sure. I already told my wife. I said, "Hey, when I retire, I'm not going to be home. I'm going to be out on the road. You're more than welcome to come if you want to, but I'm just going to hit the road." And and now it's like you'll get some vacation time and you can take off for a week or so. But I just want to hit the road, be gone for a month, and just travel all over the place. And you mentioned the Dakotas, all that area up there. North, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana. Uh, I guess Idaho. Isn't there a bunch of cool places in Idaho? I think.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so all that I want to hit Canada up. So all those places up there, and because it's so far from Texas, I don't want to just to be a quick trip. I want to be able to stay up there and enjoy my time and kind of take in all there is uh, up there to see and do. So
No, sure, that makes sense. A trip like that, I've traveled to Texas a few times, and it's not a short trip. So
no,
you and that makes sense that you'd want to do it when you can take more time. And you figure a week long vacation, yeah, there's 4 days of travel time there probably, unless you really
yes,
want to hammer it out. And that's half your vacation is taken up in that week off just traveling. So that
right,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, yeah. And even just that's probably one of my biggest gripes is I love Texas, but you literally have to drive anywhere from 8 to 10 hours just to get out of the dang state. So uh, once you get out, you're able to. I think last year, 2 years ago, I think I covered Arizona, New Mexico, and or New Mexico, Arizona, and I think I headed up into Nevada and did it all in one day. So versus Texas, it takes probably half the day just to get out of the state. But
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that the first time I went to Texas, we flew down there. I went down there for work to pick up a truck, and we were driving the truck back. Well, we flew into Midland and then ended up going over to Hobbs, New Mexico with a pickup to pick up the semi. And
uh,
on the way home driving, I was like, holy crap, are we ever gonna am I ever gonna get, not that I want to get out of the state, but it's like I've never driven that long in the state before in a straight line headed for the border before.
yes,
There's a lot of miles across the state of Texas.
it is. It is. It's like a
There's a lot of
Twilight
pretty
Zone
country down
episode.
there too, though.
It is. Yeah, yeah. There's some of it is. I mean, just completely boring, but there's some pretty cool places.
Yeah, last summer I went on a trip down there for work to Lufkin, Texas. So I'd never been on that in that part of Texas at all, and
Uh huh.
I'd never realized how many trees there are in the state because I had never been to that side of the state before. But there was some really pretty country over that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's funny you get into like the Houston area or East Texas. There's woodlands there. There's a national forest there. I had no idea, growing up, but yeah, it's the state's pretty diverse. You've got a few mountains in West Texas, and obviously the coast, the hill country in Central Texas, and then you got the plains up north, and then I guess the piney woods out east. So it's neat.
So tell me, have you ever ended up in any situations where you needed to use some of your survival skills that you've learned over the years?
Uh, I would probably have to say no, and that's you know I think I mentioned to you we did a radio interview a couple of weeks ago, and the lady asked me, "Have you ever been in a real survival situation?" I said, "It's funny, people. That's one of the things a lot of people ask, And I think they're looking for some type of, and this is just my opinion, some type of validation for survival skills that I've learned. Have you used them, or have you ever been in that type of situation? And I think, from my perspective, is the best thing to do is never to get into a survival situation. Uh, and so I don't want to say I pride myself, but and maybe I err a little more on the side of caution, but I try to be a little more, I guess, monotonous and plan and kind of look for all the possibilities, and then plan for them ahead of time. And obviously, a lot of survival situations just happen for no other reason than it just happened. But personally, I've not been in any type of survival situation where I've had to utilize the skills. I've been uh what was it? I think was it Daniel Boone said he's never been lost before, but he's been turned around for a couple of weeks. And so I've been turned around a couple of times, and it's kind of an odd feeling, uh wherein you think where you're at, and then you're not. And then you're like, uh-oh. But fortunately enough, because I had a compass and a map, I was able to reorient myself and find my way out. But so yeah, I try to plan ahead and not put myself in certain situations where I would have to use them. Although I'm fairly comfortable that if I had to spend the night or two out, that I could do it. So
It's funny you bring that up, talking about being turned around. There's a spot one of my favorite spots to hunt around home here, and it's not even that far off the road, really. It's actually this spot that ended up being my favorite spot. I was running late one day to go out bow hunting, and I had driven by the spot a million times, and I just never thought about it because it didn't from the road. And I had never really looked at it that close on, like, I use OnX quite a bit, so I had never
yes, that's
really
a great
looked at
app.
like aerial imagery of that spot before very close. And I was running out of time, and I needed to just get out and go hunt if I was going to hunt that day. And then I ended up, I saw like four real nice shooter bucks right away, and it ended up
Wow.
developing into one of my favorite spots. Like, I could dang near walk all over in there with my eyes closed and know where I'm at. Well, last fall there was a really, really foggy morning. Like, the only way you were gonna be able to take a deer was to bump into one, basically, because you'd
Uh,
have to be like real
uh-huh.
close to them. But then I was thinking, well, there's a good chance that they're not gonna, if I do end up that close to one, they're not gonna know I'm there as long as I'm quiet. Well, I was working my way into kind of my favorite spot to like look around where deer are usually bedded or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up like on the way in going over the bluffs, I crossed down a spot that I didn't even realize that's where I was headed. I thought I was all the way around them, but I dropped into the
Oh,
kind of meadow, and then I kind of got my bearings a little bit without looking at the map. I'm like, okay, I dropped into the meadow sooner than I wanted to. So I'm gonna go around this bluff and back into this other meadow. Well, I was climbing up the hill on a deer trail trying to get into my spot, and I had to stop, and I'm like, I don't have any idea where I'm at, and I've been in here, like, I know the area, but everything changes so much when you're in
oh
like
yeah.
fog or dark. Like, at night everything looks the same, it seems like. So I actually had to stop and pull out my phone, and I have offline maps saved for that area because I'm in there all the time, and I had to use that to figure out where I was 200 yards off of where I wanted to be, and I didn't even realize it because it was so
Wow.
foggy. So that's kind of like a a little wakes you up a little bit to even going in somewhere that you know really well, and it might not even be very far from the road. It's and if a thunderstorm or something popped up, it would be really easy to end up in a
Yes.
situation where you could get turned around or whatever. So I
Right,
guess
right.
it's something I had kind of overlooked. I mean, I had my map, so I was able to figure out where I was at and get navigated to where I needed to be. But it was kind of a really strange feeling going into a place that I knew that well, or I felt like I knew it that well, but you get a dense fog like we had, and I got turned around.
Right. Yeah. And then not to be the what if guy, but what if you would have, had an injury? You always, added injury to the situation and everything just compounded, so much more. But and you mentioned the turnaround thing, that the biggest thing that I've I guess found in some of my research and stuff is people get turned around, and instead of taking the time to look at their map, or think about where they were and where they are now in relation to their surroundings and stuff, they right away think, oh, I know the area, it's this way, and they'll take off. And some people have ended up going the complete opposite direction of where they need to do and get lost even further. And so it's not a light or thing to take lightly, getting lost or turned around. That's why I always suggest to carry a compass and a map. That's a good thing to have with you.
Yeah, for sure. Even like in a hunting situation, like if I'm stalking in on a deer and I'm in crunchy ground that's a little bit noisy,
Uh-huh.
I'll take my boots off, and a lot of times I have a pair of thick socks that I carry with me that I'll put on. And I'm kind of a freak about dropping pins. If you looked at my Onyx map, there are pins everywhere. And I never delete any of them, because there might be some time that I'm thinking, like, few years down the road, where did that happen at exactly again? I guess I have it to look back at. But like, I'll take my
Yeah.
boots off or drop my pack, and I always have carry some flagging tape, or a lot of times if I'm like bow hunting, for example, I do a lot of archery hunting. I have one arrow in my quiver that's just got I call them judo point, or a small game head. And I
Uh-huh.
drop that arrow with the fletching sticking up in the air, because then when you come back, it's a lot easier to find your stuff that you left lay. And I try not to go very far from it.
Yes.
I try not to drop anything like that very far from where I'm going.
Uh-huh.
It'd be a little different in the mountains because it's bigger country, but in the Badlands, I've even had a hard time finding my pack before with that arrow sticking up. So I not only drop an arrow, but I drop a pin on the map too, so that
Uh,
you kind of got two
that's
reference
smart.
points to go off of. And
Yeah.
that could end up in a sticky situation there too, I suppose, depending on events that happen or whatever. Is it so? Do you use typically just like old fashioned compass and paper map, or do you utilize any kind of mapping apps on your phone or anything like that, or GPS?
I do. I try to, and not always, although it's easier to get hold of maps nowadays. I use the old, I guess you call them standby, the USGS, 1 to 24,000 maps. And so uh, I guess that's what I'm most familiar with. So I usually always have one of those with me for that area. If I don't, I do have, and the great thing about the Onyx app is you can download maps. So even if you don't have cell service, I know a lot of people rely on Google Maps to find their way, uh, but sometimes you don't have service, and they just really won't work. So the ability to download a map and have that on your phone is awesome, as long as the phone keeps working, obviously. Uh, but I use Onyx, and there was, I think, I don't know if it's All Trails. There's another hiking app that I use that has mapping capabilities on there. So I utilize the both, but need be, I have to resort back to the basics, and I'll do that as well. And along the same lines, or on the same topic, uh, I know I always try to tell people, if you're headed into an area, always, you know, find out where you're at on the map, locate where you're going, and then always have uh, an azimuth or a degree to come out. So if you're going in, uh, a certain degree, know that you can turn around and get 180 degrees and come back the other way. So at least you'll be headed in the right direction. You won't be headed further away from where you're trying to get. Yeah.
Sure. So I the other day I just noticed Onyx, and I'm in no way sponsored by Onyx or anything like that. I just use their app and really like it, so I talk about it. I guess I've played with base maps a
Yeah.
little bit too. There's a lot of good mapping apps out there, but Onyx just came out with, so they have like Onyx Hunt, Onyx Off Road. They got all these different ones that kind of like, there's certain features about them that cater more to whatever it is that you're doing outside.
Oh,
They
huh.
just came out with one that's for backpackers and hikers.
No
I can't
kidding.
remember exactly what it's called, but it's if you like search it on your phone to look
Hmm.
for the app, it's a blue logo this time with this new one that they just came
Okay.
out with. So that might be something that you'd be interested in looking into, I guess, that it's catered a little bit more towards backpacking and hiking specifically.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look that up.
It's more trails and stuff on there. Like obviously they all have the trails on them, but this is supposed to be geared a little bit more towards that type of thing, and maybe the features work a little better, you can zoom in a little better, or what. I'm not really too sure what sets it apart from their other apps, but yeah, they just came out with I just saw it the other day, a backpacking and hiking one.
Hmm. I'll definitely have to look those. Yeah. Cool.
So I guess coming into wrapping things up here, tell me what your can you tell me what your favorite part of this adventure has been since you started getting into the survival and bushcraft?
Yeah, really, I would say that being able to take something that is near and dear to my heart, it's a passion, and being able to share that with as many people as I can for a specific reason. I always, one of the taglines we put on our announcements whenever we do the classes is that, if you've ever heard of Mr. Murphy, his law states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and usually at the worst time. And so I try to really drive home the point to people that attend the class, especially if they're new to the outdoors or beginners, is that you're out there focused on having a good time. Uh, 95% of the time, nothing will ever happen. Um, but it's that 5% or less, maybe even 2% of the time where something could possibly happen. You need to be prepared. And I always give the analogy of a smoke detector and ask, the students in the class, who's ever had a real fire in their house, with a fire department had to show up and come into your house and put a fire out. And usually it's nobody. And then I'll ask, well, who has a smoke detector in their house? And everybody raises their hand. And I'm like, well, why do you have a smoke detector? And they're like, well, in case there's a fire. I said, well, it's the same thing if you're going out, in the backcountry. You have to have these survival skills, this, quote unquote smoke detector, in the event that one day you might need them. You might not ever use a survival skill, but if you learn the skills, you practice them, you know them, and you have an incident, then you'll be able to stay safe, stay alive until somebody finds you. So to answer your question, I guess being able to share and to teach uh, this passion of mine with other people is probably the greatest benefit out of all of it.
Sure, yeah, no, and like you said, you probably won't ever ask you have to use them, and that's the ideal thing. We none of us ever want to use them, but it sure would
Right.
stink to be out there and not know how to do some of those things and then put in that situation.
Yes, yes. And the skills are easy to learn. I've taught, oh yeah, I mentioned I've taught kids how to start fires and build shelters. And um, so it's not anything hard. I think it's just, having people take the time to learn those skills and keep them fresh. So,
You know, and learning, just going to a class like that. Like I said, I had gone to an outdoor skills camp when I was a kid. It was through 4-H. It's fun. It's fun learning that stuff because you're in the outdoors where that's why you're there, because you're into being in the outdoors. So it's an experience that you're enjoying it too. It's not like going to school and sitting through a subject that you don't like or whatever. It's something
exactly.
that you already enjoy doing. So why not go learn how to or learn some of these skills?
Right, right. Definitely. You're all right. Yep.
So you wanna one more time how it's sosadventures.com.
Yes, sosadventures.com. And I've really been neglecting the site until recently. I've been posting some new, I guess, blogs on there, but really the reason I put the site together was to have a calendar for all the classes that were coming up. And so being that we weren't having the classes due to COVID and all that stuff. We kind of let it go for a little bit, and then I got involved in taking my trips and stuff. But just recently, I kind of started getting back on the side and keeping it updated. So at this point, we'll just have I'll probably have stories, blogs, postings, that kind of thing, pictures from just trips I'm taking, and then eventually, whenever we get the ball rolling again with the classes, and we'll put that sort of information back up on there.
So once you get going again, if anybody is interested in taking a class, can they can sign up for the class and everything right on that website?
Prior to COVID, yes, they could, but the Parks and Wildlife Department, where we were holding the classes, they had some type of, I guess it was an online ticketing system, just so they could keep up with, who was coming. We only had, since it was just myself, we only had room for like 15 people. And so every class was usually booked up, and we had a waiting list. So that seemed to have been the best way to do it, was through the Parks and Wildlife. But a lot of people also came through the site and logged on that way. So.
And then you mentioned YouTube too. What's the name of your channel so people can find you on there?
Yes, it's SOS Adventures, is I guess the channel name. SOS. Yeah, I'm thinking .com or at Yahoo or something, but yeah, it's, if you just type in on YouTube SOS Adventures, it should pop up. And that's another thing. Really, right now, my two passions are creating content for YouTube, taking trips, and then taking trips and the YouTube thing. The YouTube thing is a little harder for anybody that's ever tried it before. It's just really, really time consuming. I had some other videos up there before and just ended up deleting them because I just wasn't happy with them. But I think that's kind of where I'm headed until we get the classes rolling again. And for me, it's going to be taking trips and then documenting those trips and uploading those trips to YouTube. So
cool. Yeah. So everybody can find you on your website, sosadventures.com, YouTube at SOS Adventures, and then also on Go Wild under Joey Rivers, correct?
Joey Rivers, yes, that's right.
And I'll make sure in the show notes to put up links to all those different outlets to get connected with Joey. If you have any questions for him or whatever, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions that we didn't get answered on the podcast today.
Most definitely.
So thanks for joining me, Joey. It was fun. I like to learn a little bit of new stuff once in a while, and that your 10 C's, I didn't know that. So I'm gonna have to write those down and memorize them and make sure I got all the stuff that I should have in my pack when I go out.
Yes, definitely. Please do. Yeah, I again want to thank you for having me on. This was a really, really cool experience. As I mentioned, my first podcast ever. So I had a blast, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.